So we are going to create our data models next. And because we're going to be generating a database, it is helpful to visualize how you're going to relate your tables. Because there are conventions in Entity Framework where how you name your columns determines, if it's a key, a primary key, or a foreign key. You also need to be aware of these relationships because we have to add something called navigation properties below the regular properties, which turn into our columns. Okay, so drawing this out, whether it's on paper or in some software application, drawing this out ahead of time is super helpful. And PK stands for primary key, FK stands for foreign key. Okay, so really helpful to see these relationships. So you can see we've got 3 models, and in each one we've got our properties laid out. 2 different ways you can identify a primary key in Entity Framework. You can either use ID, or you can take the name of your class and put that in front of ID. Okay, so either one of those, it is determining that as the primary key. If you take the name of a different class followed by ID, so we're looking at enrollment here. If you take the name of a different class like course followed by ID, it assumes that's a foreign key, and you're going to use that to connect your tables. Same with student ID. Student is a different class. We put ID after it. It assumes that's going to be a foreign key. And then for the relationships, typically the table with the primary key is the one table. The table with the foreign key is the many. So creating the student entity or class, we're going to add to the models, add the class like we have been. Here are the properties that we need. And then what's new is this navigation property. So we're looking at student. So in our relationship, the student is the primary, and we're relating to enrollment. So one student can have many enrollments. So the navigation property that we need has to be a collection. It has to allow for more than one. So we've got public virtual, and we put the virtual in there basically for inheritance purposes. We've got iCollection. Enrollment is the name of the class or table that we're connecting to. This is what we are calling it. And then we have a get set. Okay, and again, this is called a navigation property. If you are not familiar with iCollection, I do have a link to the iCollection interface here, and this does give you more information on iCollection. Okay, so that's our first one. And I'm going to copy this and come in here and right-click on Models, Add Class. We're calling it Student. And then I'm going to paste right in here. And let me save. So that was our first one. Next, we're going to do enrollment. Now, if we look up here in enrollment, this is the many. Okay, so one student can have many enrollments, one course can have many enrollments. Okay, so the navigation properties for this are it's connected to course and student. So course and student are not collections, right? Because one course can have many enrollments, one student can have many enrollments. So this is how we enter them. Another thing in this one is that for the grade, we are using enum. And these are the letters that they have to choose from. So you'll notice for grade, we have a question mark after that. So when you use an enum, the grade becomes the data type, and a question mark means it's optional. It may or may not be filled in. Okay, so for this, I'm actually going to highlight all of this and copy it. And then we're going to create enrollment. And let me see, I'm going to paste right here. Okay, so I've got the enum, I've got the properties, and then down here, I've got my navigation properties. And you'll notice it is flagging course, and that's because we haven't created it yet. So I'm going to save, and we'll come back out here. And I pointed this out earlier, but instead of just putting ID here, we have enrollment ID. Okay, that is one of the naming conventions for a primary key. Now, typically, you would use the same naming convention in all of your tables. So you are either going to take the class name in front of ID or just use ID. I did both here so you could see how each works. It is easier if you're going to use this as a base for inheritance. It is easier to inherit from ID. Okay, so when you're designing your models and classes, you may want to keep that in mind. And I mentioned grade was an enum, and if you're not familiar with those, I do have a link to that, so you can kind of refresh or read up on that. We did mention course ID and student ID were foreign keys, okay, because they have the class name followed by ID of a separate class. Okay, so Entity Framework interprets that as a foreign key. Then we get down to our last one, which is course. And you will notice that we have the regular properties here, and we did go with that naming convention of putting course in front of ID. You'll notice that we have a navigation property here because it is connected to enrollments, and one course can have many enrollments. So we have a collection. And then the other thing to note here is that above course ID, we have an attribute, database generated option.none. And basically that means that we can actually enter the course ID instead of having the database generated. Okay, so if you want to be able to enter your ID instead of having it auto entered, you can use that attribute. So I'm going to copy this portion, and we're going to go ahead and create course. And I'm going to paste it right in here. And now if we went back and looked, at enrollment, we should be okay because we have added course. Now we do have another little issue here. And that usually means we are missing something up at the top. And I can see right away, we are missing the data annotations. So you are definitely going to want to copy that. And let us paste this up at the top. And that gets rid of our problem. So let me save that. You'll notice that I don't have at the top the number of using statements that are pulled in by default. That is because there's some that aren't being used. So if you are worried about efficiencies, you can actually make yours match what I have. So for students, we only need those two. And actually, it should tell us, yeah, that this link directive is unnecessary. Okay, and so is the system web. And let's see if we go into students, it should tell us the same thing. That's not necessary, and neither is the one below it. Okay, and you can kind of see that. And let's get rid of those. And let's save everything. And I'm going to go ahead and do a build. And I believe at this point we are good. Okay, so we have our 3 models created.